So I'm Rory Fitzgerald, Director of the European Social Survey, and I'm based at City University in London. Normally, at the moment, we're back into lockdowns, or semi-lockdown, so I'm actually in my back room. And I'm joined by my colleague, Diana Zavala-Rojas from University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, who's part of the core scientific team of the European Social Survey. And we're also very, very happy to be here and to be working with ICOS Eric in the POOL project. It's a very exciting development for us, and I hope it shows the future of interdisciplinary work more generally. So we're very excited about that. Today we're going to be talking not so much about what we do in the POOL project, but what we do more generally. To give some background, first of all, to the European Social Survey, which I'm going to do, and then Diana is going to present some of the results from one of our modules in the ESS that was specifically on climate change and energy. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So background to the European Social Survey. We've actually been in existence since 2001. And the idea behind establishing the European Social Survey came from scientists, particularly political scientists, who were trying to make comparisons between nation states in Europe on trust in their political systems. And every time they tried to make those comparisons, they were thwarted by the methodological differences in how data was collected from human beings about their trust in politics. So there were lots of surveys that measured political attitudes and behaviour in Europe, but because they were conducted in such different ways, it was very difficult to then make comparisons between the countries. And so the idea for a European social survey was born through the European Science Foundation. And we are an academically led cross-national social survey, and we aim primarily to serve the academic community in Europe. We measure public attitudes, but also behaviour. So far, we've completed 9 rounds. We're a biennial survey, so it takes place every 2 years. Our 10th round, unfortunately, has been delayed by the pandemic somewhat, but we're currently in the field with that. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. There's 38 countries that have ever participated in the European Social Survey. Normally now in each round, we have around 30 countries participating. And there's 15 countries that have taken part in every round since 2002. We make our data set publicly available. So anyone anywhere in the world can download the data following a short registration process. It's anonymized. So it's available to academics, students, citizens, journalists, and so forth. Our data collection is based around face-to-face interviews, and our questionnaire lasts around 1 hour. So we interview our respondents for approximately 1 hour, and each round has to be translated into around 50 languages. Up until round 9, we'd interviewed just over 400,000 people living in Europe. I mentioned that all of our data is free for non-commercial use, and I'll talk a bit more about the use later on, but over 184,000 people have registered to use our data, about 2/3 of those being students. And in terms of outputs that arise from that, there's just over 5,000 publications that have used ESS data. And ESS data is also used routinely beyond academia as well, so in policy, in monitoring, and it appears in the media as well. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a little bit about the background to the ESS. It was first funded in 2001. The central costs of running the survey were met by the European Commission then through the framework programmes. And then in 2013, we became a European Research Infrastructure Consortium. And I believe we currently have the highest number of national members of any ERIC at 26 confirmed and 1 in the process of being finalised, which I hope will be finalised in the new year, and that will be Serbia. In 2005, we won the Descartes Prize for comparative research methods. And also we've been on the S3 roadmap over time. And the founder director of the ESS, the late Sir Roger Jowell, he talked about how he wanted the thoughts, attitudes and behaviour of Europeans to be well measured, so that European governments have a key source of being aware of that and they couldn't ignore public attitudes in the policy process. Next slide, please. So the European Social Survey is run by a core scientific team, the headquarters of which are at City University of London, where I'm based. There are also partners in Germany, Norway, the Netherlands, Spain, and Slovenia. And together those partners design the survey, design the specification, and then there's a national coordinator who's appointed in each country. And that national coordinator is then responsible for realising the survey according to the specification which we issue. And we work very closely with the coordinators in each of those countries to implement the survey. If we go to the next slide, please. So this is the coverage up to round 9. As I mentioned, we're now in our 10th round. And this shows the countries, the 15 countries which have been in every round, but also the countries that perhaps participated only in one or more rounds. And the reason for these differences in participation has been that each country is responsible for raising its own funding to actually implement the survey in the project. And when we became an ERIC, the number of participating countries went down somewhat. But as I said, it's now up to these 28 countries that are in every round. And we include most of the countries in the European Union and also some countries outside of the EU, such as Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland. Next slide, please. So this shows the growth in our users. So users are counted as those that register on our website. So it's email addresses entered into our website in order to download data or access documentation. You can see that this has grown considerably over time. About 70% of these users are students, a large number also of academics and faculty and PhDs as well. And there are about 5,000 what I would call regular users, those that are coming back to use the data year on year to download that. Next slide, please. And this is some results from some recent bibliometric analysis that's been conducted by Technopolis for us. And you can see the number of publications listed in the Web of Science. And just over 20% of those are based in the top 10% most cited by field, where 10% would be expected. About 41% of these are open access. We'd hope to see that increase as we move more towards open science in Europe. Next slide, please. So the questionnaire of the European Social Survey is divided into two parts. There's a core part which is repeated in almost every round of the ESS, and that's about 2/3 of the questionnaire. And here are a range of topics from media use and social trust, political interest, participation, party ID, socio-political orientations, and attitudes to things like religion and minority groups. There's also questions about subjective well-being and social exclusion, crime, religion, voting intention in EU referendums, and so forth. And all of that information is complemented by very detailed questions around the background of the respondents. So we have detailed questions about education, the highest level of education achieved, and make that comparable across Europe. Also detailed information about the occupation of respondents and their partners, and questions about sex, age, marital status, and so forth. And at the end of the questionnaire, there's some information about the human values of respondents, with 21 items there. And then every 2 years, we open up part of our questionnaire to academics outside of the core team of the ESS. And this is an open competition held across Europe. And if we could go to the next slide. So those, sorry, I think maybe I've skipped. If we could probably perhaps, Diana, go to the next slide after this. Yeah, these are the results of the teams who've applied to take part in the ESS and design part of the questionnaire. And they design what's called a rotating module of around 30 items. And some of those are then repeated later on in the process. So you can see in our first round, 2002, there was a module on attitudes towards immigration, and that was repeated in 2014. You can see the climate change and energy module, which Diana will be talking about in a few moments, was in our 8th round in 2016 and 2017. And in our current round, We have a module on attitudes and evaluations of democracy, and also which is a repeat module from earlier, and a new module on digital social contacts in work and family life. And for our 11th round, we're repeating a module on health inequalities, which will be fascinating and hopefully extremely helpful in the context of the pandemic. So that was first fielded in round 7. So we'll be really able to see how health inequalities have changed as a result of the pandemic, and a new module on attitudes towards gender and different roles for men and women. So Deanna, if we could please go back one slide, if that's okay. I also just wanted to talk a little bit about the methods of the European Social Survey, because of course surveys are something which happen a lot. There are surveys done by students in universities, commercial organisations for market research, and so forth. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we differ from that. We put a lot of effort into the methods that we use. We try to be, in some ways, the gold standard of survey research, and particularly of comparative survey research. And we really try to follow the scientific process in our field. So, for example, the way in which we select the people who we do the interviews with in the countries, we find the best sampling frame that's available so that we can select people with a known and non-zero probability from the sampling frame. So, for example, in countries that have population registers where people are named, we obtain access to that sampling frame. For example, in France, we use the population register, and also in Norway. And then we group respondents within those areas into particular areas where face-to-face interviews will go. And then we select people with a known probability in those areas. And then only the named person who we've selected can take part in the survey. And we take multiple visits over many, many months and weeks in order to give that person an opportunity to take part. And we follow a process of using equivalent design. So if a population register, for example, isn't available, like in my own country, the United Kingdom, we use the best frame that is available. So in the UK, it happens to be a list of all the residential post boxes, so all of the households that exist. And then we do a similar process of selecting those households. And then within that household, we take a listing of all the people who live at that address, and we select one of those, and only that person can take part in the survey. And then depending on how much the design in each country differs from a simple random sample, we then have to increase or decrease the sample size that's issued to the interviewers in order to make that design equivalent. So we put a lot of work into the sampling design, and we work closely with the countries to ensure they have the same meaning across the countries. We spend around 18 months on the design of the questions, testing those in multiple countries and using various statistical techniques and tools along the way. So we don't just simply sit down and write the questions. We work very closely to ensure that they have high validity, and also to ensure that they have equivalence across the different countries that are taking part, which, as you can understand, there's a very different survey landscape across these 30 plus countries. We put a lot of effort as well into the translation to ensure that the meaning is equivalent. So we don't use back translation, which was the methodology of the past, but we use a team translation approach called translation, review, adjudication, pre-testing, and documentation. We use the same method of interviewing, at least currently, in all countries, which is face-to-face interviews, although as a result of the pandemic, in some countries now we are using online and paper self-completion questionnaires instead. But at least to date, for the main data collection, we've used the same mode in all countries. Each country selects the best provider to conduct the research. So unlike scientists in the natural scientists, we don't have our own telescopes or our own labs. At least currently, we are reliant on the best providers. That might be a national statistical institute or a known research institute in the country who's selected to actually run the survey with us, working with our national coordinator. Quality control at key stages. So national teams are required to have pre-processes signed off before we go into the field, and we work with them carefully to, for example, to monitor the field work whilst it's underway. Once the data has been collected, it's sent to our data archive in Norway securely, and then it's anonymized carefully, and we also check to ensure that the data meets all of our requirements and is cleaned. And then the data from each country is put together into a single data file and made available for download by scientists and others across Europe and the rest of the world. And also after each round, we do a lot of quality control and post-hoc quality assessment, and then we try to, of course, to improve things for future rounds. So we really do put a lot of time and effort into the quality of the data which we collect, so that our end users can be confident that they have high quality data that was collected with care. So Diana, if we could skip 2 slides, please. And I'm now going to pass over to Diana, who's going to talk about our attitude on climate change and energy security.
Thank you, Rory. So good morning, everyone. We will be looking at some of our key results from this module. First, a brief introduction to it. So the long name of this set of questions is called Public Attitudes to Climate Change, Energy Security and Energy Preferences. It was released in 2016, and it is composed by 32 questions. It covers 4 broad areas. First are general beliefs on climate change, which you will see the results and general comparative results across countries. Concerns about climate change and energy security. Then personal norms, efficacy, and trust towards policy in this respect, in this topic. And finally, energy preferences, energy consumption preferences. The module aims to increase our understanding of how Europeans' perceptions of climate change, energy security, and energy preferences are shaped by national and sociopolitical factors. Then the module also aims at examining the role of sociopolitical values and engagement of respondents in this topic, and examine the relative importance of individual and motivational versus national contextual variables in public energy preferences. So just to give you a general overview of the data, this is the number of observations in every country. All the data I will present has been weighted with post-stratification weights, weights that we provide for you to correct for sampling and other differences in the data. So more or less, well, the average of this is 1,500 cases. And we had Iceland with the lowest number of cases, 880, and countries such as Germany and Ireland are quite big, with 2,852 cases in the case of Germany, and 2,757 cases in the case of Ireland. So we go to the basic question. We ask respondents if they think whether the world was changing or not, where the world climate change is changing or not. And this is the results. Just take a moment with me to understand the question. So I have the bar here, so I cannot read it full now. But let me check how well. The bar of the Zoom is on top, and I cannot read the question properly, but you can do it. I'll leave you a second for doing that. And the basic question is, so do you think the world's climate is changing? the categories we have go from definitely changing, probably not changing, and definitely not changing. So you will see that in the y-axis, the relative frequencies are plotted. So this can be, this is a proportion that goes from 0 to 1 on every of these categories. So what you see here is that in most countries, the category definitely changing is quite important, although it is not largest everywhere. So when Rory and I were looking at these results, we commented a lot that everything that was not definitely changing is problematic, no? Because we tend to see, for instance, category 2 probably changing as something, well, they load more in the positive side, but no. So most people, and these people is the majority in some countries, give a chance to it. So they say it could be changing or not, no? And we have these very high percentages, for instance, in Finland, where even the second category looks like a bit larger with statistical significance. In Estonia as well, whereas countries such as Germany and France and Portugal, the picture, Slovenia as well, the picture is clearer for a generalized opinion that the climate, the world climate is definitely changing. So in our next slide, I will zoom in the first two categories. So we have, again, in the y-axis here, it's the number of valid cases in order to be able to compare two questions. And then in the x-axis, we have the first two categories of this opinion, whether people think the climate is changing. So we have definitely changing at the left and probably changing at the right. And within these bars, we have the relative proportion of a second question that we ask our respondents. And this is about who they think is climate change, the responsibility of climate change. No? If it is entirely by natural processes, so if this is happening, so to say, without human activity impact, whether by natural processes, this would be these two categories basically do not appear. So it's really a minority, except in some countries. Lithuania, for instance, a good share of respondents say that it is mainly by natural processes. But then the green and blue areas are interesting to interpret. So the green first means that it is about equally by natural processes and human activity. And in this consortium and in this, I mean, in ICOS and in this project that we're working on together, we know that the correct answer would be mainly by human activity, and we know that there's a correct answer. Nevertheless, many people think around Europe that this climate change is triggered equally by natural processes and human activity. So although they think the world climate change is definitely changing, such as in Ireland, you can see it here, basically half and half would think that what drives this process is equally natural processes and human activity. And about the same share of that would think that this is caused by human activities. So I think scientists and policymakers and stakeholders, we do have an education task here towards population, and yeah, more awareness on this topic is really necessary. In the next slide, people is asked about whether they think they have a personal responsibility in climate change. And you can see that there's no, so the distribution, this plot shows the number of valid cases in the y-axis and the response categories in the x-axis. And you will see that around Europe, this opinion is very spread. So there's a lot of variability in the data. It's not that in all countries, a large share of people think that they have a personal large responsibility, great deal of responsibility. But actually in some countries, we see quite the opposite. Now, for instance, in Czechia, we can see that a large proportion of people think that it's not at all their business. And in other countries, we have a large proportion of it. No, I was just pointing out some examples: Estonia, Ireland, Israel, and so on. But in the rest, I would say this is really spread. No? So opinion is really different across countries, but within the same country as well, about our responsibility in this issue. This is the same graph. This is the same question, sorry, but with a different visual layout. And here, what we can see in this box plot, so the middle line shows the median number of cases, and the number is the mean, the average. We can see here that the average across countries differs significantly, where countries such as Czechia and Russia, and also probably Hungary, have the lowest means of in a scale from 0 to 10 on this share of how large is the personal responsibility to try to reduce climate change. Whereas in other countries, although the mean would be not significantly different, definitely the distribution is less spread. And you can see here France, for instance, also Germany, that is here, and well, Switzerland as well. And so you can also see that countries with a similar mean values, such as Germany and Finland, will have different proportions of distribution with respect to others, such as Norway or Sweden or Switzerland. So how skewed and how spread is this data differs a lot from country to country. Now we also, I will show you some data on support for the following policies. And here we have 3 questions. So subsidies to renewable energy sources, banning household appliances that are low energy efficient, and finally increasing taxes on fossil fuels such as oil, gas, and coal. You can see that here the focus of the policy is quite different. So in the first is about public expenditure. In the second one is about laws and regulation, and the third one is increasing taxes. And you will see here that the support for this policy is quite different. So just a moment so we can understand this graph, and then you can see the results. So on the left axis, we have the countries, and each bar represents the distribution in percentage of these 5 categories about support to this policy, using public money to subsidize renewable energy such as wind and solar. And in these categories, the blue ones represent strongly in favor, this is the darkest blue, and the light blue somewhat in favor. Then in the right-hand side, I have the proportion of valid answers. No? So we excluded answers as the no, I don't want to answer, I want to skip this question, etc. So you can see that in this graph, we can see that all over Europe, the majority of people is either strongly in favor or very much somewhat in favor about using public money to subsidize renewable energy and so on. And you can see that the proportion that is the percentage that is against this policy and strongly against is a minority. For instance, we can look at places like Hungary, which have a huge support for this policy and a very small percentage against it. Also Slovenia is quite remarkable in this case. But in general, this policy is widely supported across Europe. Then when it comes to laws banning the sale of the least energy efficient household appliances, also the support is quite large. Here, when we have laws banning what can be sold in the market, we have a bit more of a position, and also a bit more of people who's undecided on whether they favor or not this type of policy. You can see here that the bar in the middle, this gray category showing either in favor or not against, is a bit larger than in previous question. And we can see that some countries change their opinion here, such as Hungary, which saw a huge proportion of people strongly in favor of subsidies, but less clear about banning what can be sold in the market. Now we move to the third policy, increasing taxes on fossil fuels such as oil, gas, and coal. And you see here that the picture changes quite dramatically. So we can focus again in Hungary, which has a huge support towards subsidies and a moderate large support towards banning non-efficient appliances, but they will have a really low support for increasing taxes in these areas. And also the share that is strongly against these policies is larger, is significantly larger. But this happens not only in Hungary, but in all cases. We also focus in Slovenia in our last slides. And now here we see that the opinion changes dramatically. I think two cases that can be highlighted in this process, if not really large, strongly support, but a good amount of a combination of support is Finland, Switzerland, Sweden. Yeah. Then I move on to our last set of questions. So we ask our respondents to think how likely they think that by changing behavior, either collectively or individually, climate change would be mitigated. And we have here 4 indicators for measurement questions. So now imagine that large numbers of people limited their energy use. How likely do you think it is that this would reduce climate change? So first is about other people, large number of people. Then we ask how likely do you think it is that actually these people will limit their energy use? So a voluntary behavior here about the others. Then we ask how likely do you think that governments in enough countries will take action that reduces climate change? And finally, we ask them about their own behavior. How likely do you think it is that limiting your own energy use would help reduce climate change? So about the first question, people is quite optimistic, I would say, if we compare these results to the others. So all above 5.5, they would say, yes, let's think that if large number of people do change their behavior, we can reduce climate change. So large number of people. Then the second is related to the first one, but is a bit less optimistic. So when we ask how many they, how much they think, how likely they think people will actually limit their energy use or change their behavior, the picture is less optimistic. So we see that, for instance, countries such as Spain that thinks that yes, if we do that in large number of people, when it goes to thinking, if you think that people would actually do it, the mean is reduced to 5. So 2 points from this behavior will have some impact too. In fact, I think this behavior will happen. Then when it's about government, we have a bit of a more stable opinion, I would say. So in many countries, the mean value is around 6. So it means that yes, more about than just the mid of the scale, people would be more positive towards yes, countries will take action enough. Except in some countries such as Germany, for instance, that this is this opinion is lower. Just to give you a bit more of context, this data correlates a lot with trust in institutions. So whether people have a higher trust in institution, they may think the responses on average to policies and to this type of actions are larger. But in this specific question, that is not the case. So in general, when you ask about policies, and so it correlates with trust. But here we see such a kind of a stable opinion across countries. Finally, about our own behavior. And this is my last question. So we see more variability on the data. So some people are really not convinced that changing their behavior would have much impact. And we can see Czechia, Estonia here, Russia and Slovenia that are below 4. And here we don't have really highly optimistic countries that will go up to the 7 in terms of mean. And I think this is remarkable because when we talk about large number of people, so when we see this in context of collective behavior, people is more optimistic. When we go to individual behavior, we don't think our own impact is that large. So I think that we don't want to spend more time giving you data. Maybe we open more the discussion, and you may already have some questions. So I'll stop sharing to be able to see you, and we open the discussion session. Thank you. So any questions to Rory and me? From there. Yeah. Any questions?
Thank you very much for both of your talks. That was very interesting, very far away from my personal field I'm moving in usually. So this is absolutely exciting. At the moment, there is nothing in the chat box and no hands raised. Then I may ask you a question. So I understand this takes a lot of time to prepare those questions, to make the selection of people and the interviews, live interviews. So if I understand correctly, basically those questions started in 2016 and then they have been asked in 2018, which is quite a long time ago. At least for me, I'm not from the social sciences. Maybe for you guys, this is a very short period of time. I don't know. But my question is more towards my feeling is that the perception of the people has changed in the last couple of years towards climate change, the urgency of we need to do something. So these answers may not represent the current situation in Europe. Do you take this into account, or is there like a follow-up of those questions to see a change in behavior over time? Or how do you deal with this kind of development?
So maybe I can answer that with it. So these questions are in a specific module that was selected for sort of one-time inclusion, but there are a small number of the items that have been repeated, particularly the ones at the beginning about perceptions of climate change. There were quite small changes between 2016 and 2018, but it will be interesting, I think, when we release the data from our 10th round later this year, to see if there has been a big change around that, particularly with the recent climate conferences, and maybe more focus on that because of some of the actual changes in the climate that people are perhaps really seeing. So I think in general, social attitudes do change very slowly, and it's often a quite a gradual process. But it will be. We look forward to seeing these results in this year's data collection.
Thank you very much. We have a raised hand from Sanam Bardak.
Hi, I'm Sanam Bardak from Heidelberg University. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. And I think that's very relevant work. I'm also not from the social sciences department, but I'm wondering how much your surveys to come will be also tailored to the products which ICOS will deliver, like the natural science products, like all the results from the 3 pilot cities. Will you take that into account, or will you have some kind of focus also on these areas?
So what we're doing in the pool project is something completely different the first time we've done it. So normally our measurement level is the nation state, so making comparisons between countries. On the pool project, what we're doing instead is looking in 2 cities. So we're doing 2 of the 3 cities. We're doing Munich and Paris, and there we will be devising questionnaires specifically with other colleagues in the project to tailor the questions. But at the moment, I think that's a bit of an open question as to what the content of the questionnaire will be, because we need to learn more about what's happening in each of the cities, and also, of course, to make sure we ask questions about things which respondents are likely to know about. And I think in the kickoff meeting, one of the questions we asked was, are respondents in these 2 cities likely to be aware at this stage of the facilities, for example, that are being built? And that it wasn't clear, I think, in the setup meeting whether people would be. But absolutely, we'll be tailoring the questions. They'll be much more specific about what's going on in the city, and our understanding is that the cities will also be undertaking specific efforts to educate the population in their cities, and also to have specific initiatives to also try and reduce carbon emissions. So we will be focused on those. Diana, I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Yeah, I think nowadays we know that colleagues in our work package, such as task 1.2 and 1.4, I think, are collecting information, contextual information, such as policy frameworks and so. And from there, I think we need to tailor and take the information to do these questions about policy. I would expect something about policy preferences as well, and policy knowledge. Werner?
Okay, thank you.
I see another hand raised, Werner. Probably.
Yes, Werner, please go ahead.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you for this presentation, for your work. I think one aspect was particularly interesting for us, or for me, when you were showing the results about what people think are the reasons of climate change. And I think this shows that we have, as scientists, a lot of work still to do to provide the most recent knowledge on climate change. But I have also another question. I think we only scratched the surface of your data analysis. And from our work, I know that we usually also use so-called ancillary data, which means that, for example, if we compare forests or if we compare ecosystems, it's important that we know this is a forest, this is agricultural land, this is a wetland, because this helps to interpret. Or if we compare different croplands, then the management of the cropland is important to analyze the fluxes. So my question goes in this direction. Do you also have ancillary data? Perhaps I can explain this. Perhaps I should not, because it's showing then that I'm a non-social scientist, and perhaps that I'm also thinking in stereotypes. But you showed these three different approaches: subsidies, law, and taxes. And from a first glimpse on this, I had the impression that mainly Catholic countries perhaps like more to have laws and less to have taxes. My personal interpretation would there be that as Catholics, you can break the laws and then you go and confess your sins and then you are still going to heaven. So is this kind of background or ancillary data a part of your research and your data interpretation?
I'll maybe go first. So at the individual level, there's data that you could correlate with these results about the respondents' own religious preferences. And absolutely, many scholars do take that kind of typology and apply it to their analysis. One of the most common ones is the welfare regime types. The welfare state types is often used when people are analysing ESS modules. Perhaps a little bit less common is the religious background type. It's an interesting point, and actually quite often we do actually find that stereotypes are reinforced sometimes by the ESS data, sometimes challenged, sometimes reinforced. So absolutely, that's something that is done. One of the other things that's done sometimes is to take other auxiliary data and put it alongside the ESS data. So we have a multi-level data depository where you can link, for example, data from on GDP levels, or you could have other data in there in the future, like amount of spending on amount of levels of renewable energy, for example, that produced in the country as a proportion of all energy. So yes, that kind of data is often looked at alongside ESS data. And in the EOS Future project, we're really hoping to link a lot more data from other disciplines alongside the ESS data itself.
Yeah.
Diana?
Yeah, I would just add that linking values, attitudes, and preference to religious aspects is, I think, one area that is studied a lot in sociology. Yeah. Here we didn't want to weigh the data for those considerations, but you have a large number of questions. What would you call an ancillary data or control data? A lot of sociodemographic characteristics of respondents, not only of them, but also of their parents for some questions. And you mentioned the aspect of different landscapes. So rural, urban, that is a good hypothesis, not to investigate how much impact has urban rural data on how these opinions are spread. Nevertheless, I do think it's still worrying. And about Claudio's first question, yeah, I do think that people have changed their attitudes to some extent. We will see that in our new round 10 data. But this is already 2016, so the picture was not that clear at that time, no? that people really have this idea or the correct answer, no? Because normally in our questions we seldom ask about knowledge, its attitudes or its opinions, but you can see that here the opinion should have a correct answer, and that was not that spread at that time. So I do hope that the data change a lot, whereas I would cause us for being that optimistic.